Welcome back. This is the Pixel 6 from Google, and it was my first Android. So I've been using this alongside iPhone 13 Pro for a few months now, and it's been a pretty interesting experience. Starting with the design, this phone has really fun aesthetics, from the two-tone back to all the really little details in the software. I ended up going with the sorta seafoam colorway, and I think it looks really good. I thought it was gonna be a lot greener just based off photos, but I really like how it looks kind of blue on the bottom half of the back. Also, I really like having matte black aluminum rails since they don't pick up a ton of fingerprints and they just look really clean. But I'm like constantly worried about scratching the black anodizing and exposing the raw aluminum underneath. Also, I do wish they were flat rather than rounded over like on the iPhone. I prefer a more industrial look overall like the iPhone and the MacBook, but I do appreciate the fun aesthetics that the Pixel has with the rounded edges. At least the screen is flat and not rounded over at the edges, which is actually the big reason I went with the 6 over the 6 Pro. When I was holding them at Best Buy, I just didn't like having that rounded over screen. It just didn't feel right. Maybe I'm just used to the flat displays on iPhones. And going back to the software, Android 12 is definitely a different experience compared to iOS. The animations are bouncier, everything's just generally more rounded, and the overall aesthetics of the system as a whole include a lot more color. I really like how when you choose a wallpaper, it lets you pick an accent color based off that wallpaper, which is then used throughout the system. I think this attention to detail helps you feel a little bit more like the phone is suited and customized to you based off just something as simple as changing your wallpaper. And that level of attention to detail like carries over to the animations. Like when you unlock your phone, the screen turns on radiating from the fingerprint sensor, and the same for locking, it turns off toward the power button. And even when you're just doing things like swiping around the UI or opening apps, the animations feel like fun and bouncy rather than just like straight and to the point. You know, it's like that attention to detail makes it feel a little bit more personal and less robotic. And this is really cool, but there were definitely times where I felt like it took too long for something to open or for something to launch, and I just wanted an app open. Specifically in Twitter, I feel like everything feels a little bit slower, like exiting a picture when I click on one, or like going back a page. It just feels a little bit less snappy compared to the iPhone. And the rest of the software experience in general like wasn't bad. It did take some getting used to for things like where all the settings are for the settings app and swiping up for the app drawer as opposed to swiping all the way over or pulling down Spotlight search. And speaking of which, I did miss having Spotlight search just for launching apps. Like I can Google from the Google search bar that's on the homepage, but I really enjoyed Spotlight for just pulling down, launching an app that I didn't have on my homepage and I didn't use often enough to keep on my homepage. But if there is like an alternative to that for Android, or I just haven't found it, just let me know down in the comments. But I do enjoy like the customizability of the home screen. Like I can keep my main home screen pretty minimal, and all the apps I use most frequently are right down at the bottom where I can quickly reach them, and I can have a clock and weather right at the top. Also, one thing I noticed was that this phone vibrates a lot. Like every time I put it upside down on my desk, it would vibrate just a little bit. And the first few times I'd pick it up again thinking I got an actual notification, but it turns out it was just going into do not disturb and vibrating to signal that it was on. And this is a really cool feature because I usually put my phone upside down anyway so that the screen doesn't light up and distract me. The fact that it just automatically goes into DND is pretty convenient. I could do without all the vibrations though. There's also all the new like AI and ML stuff you get from things like live translation all the way to the new stuff with the camera. But first, the actual photos. And I really like them. They look good. Pixel 6 has an 8 megapixel hole punch selfie camera up front, a 50 megapixel wide bind at 12 megapixels, and a 12 megapixel ultra wide in the camera visor on the back, which I find is just nice to use as a resting point for my finger when I hold the phone. Also, and this is kind of a small thing, but since the visor spans the entire width of the phone, when you put it down on a table, it's at an angle, yes, but it's also completely level. So when you tap on the screen, it doesn't rock back and forth like you would see on a phone with a camera bump. Pretty minor, but it is nice and a little convenient. And going back to the actual cameras in the visor, with good lighting, they all look great. There's good detail, a decent amount of contrast, and the colors are all well balanced. But you do get a little bit of noise in the shadows, but overall they're pretty solid. Although when you lose light, you also lose some detail. I'd say like 90% of the time I'm still gonna pick up the iPhone since it has a larger sensor that's gonna let in a lot more light. And I'm just a fan of how the photos look straight out of camera. But I do like the Pixel for all of its computational photography, which are powered by the new Tensor chip. And there's a ton of different things like removing objects from the background, unblurring faces if like a kid's moving in a photo, action pan and long exposure. Personally, I was really excited for action pan since I think that type of shot looks really cool, but it's really hard to get right with an actual camera. And it did take a couple of tries with the Pixel 2. I think the first couple had the car going too slow, but eventually I was able to get it just right, I think. And I'm sure these are by no means like comparable in quality or like skill level to an actual panning shot, but this is really fun and just cool to have. And the other motion camera feature, long exposure, does work too. It's click, hold your phone pretty steady and it'll like blur the water as it moves. Long exposure isn't something I like, but it is nice to have. But I think the coolest feature by far is Magic Eraser. It's really good for small stuff, just really random things in the background. It doesn't do too well with anything really complex, but it is a great way to get this type of editing tech like exposed to a wider variety of people. The amount of AI and machine learning that Tensor brings to your phone is really impressive. From the camera features to live translation and live captioning of audio on device. And I'm personally not a fan of dictation since it's just kind of a hassle, but the Pixel 6 does it really well to where I find myself using it more often for things like Googling, just doing quick responses to messages. Overall, this is a pretty impressive phone that brings the latest of AI and machine learning literally into the palm of your hand. And it makes me that much more excited to see what Pixel 7 will be able to do with the second generation of Tensor. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe down below for more videos about tech, cameras, and making. Here's a video about using Pixel 6 to control a 3D printer, and here's a video that YouTube thinks you're gonna like the best.